The young man who overcame depression. With the Mama I'm Coming Home met Ozzy Osbourne. The sky above Manchester that March evening hung heavy and gray, like a curtain refusing to lift. The drizzle that never quite became rain tapped against the window of a modest two-story house on Ashton Road. Inside, a 19-year-old sat silently by his bedroom window, his eyes following the slow crawl of water down the glass. David Thompson had been staring at the same view for months, the same lamppost flickering at the corner, the same buses groaning past, the same neighbors who no longer waved. 6 months ago, his life had been full of promise. He was studying English literature at university, surrounded by friends, laughter, and plans. Now, that world felt like a memory from another lifetime. The books that once filled his days, Shakespeare, Dickens, Shelley, were scattered on the floor, gathering dust. The curtains hadn't been opened in weeks. The air smelled faintly of old coffee and loneliness. Dirty dishes cluttered the nightstand beside his bed, and a half-broken lamp stood like a monument to all the things he'd stopped caring about. David's reflection in the window was thin and tired. His brown hair had grown uneven, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. The silence of his room pressed against his chest like a weight. Every night, when the city went quiet, the same thoughts returned, uninvited, unstoppable. I'm a failure. I disappointed everyone. I'll never find my way again. It wasn't that David wanted to die. It was that he didn't know how to live anymore. His mother, Sarah Thompson, tried to help. Every morning she would knock gently on his door. "David, love, breakfast is ready." Most mornings there was no reply. Other times a faint, "I'm not hungry." She had pleaded with him to see a doctor. Maybe some medication could help, she'd said softly one evening, sitting at the edge of his bed. "I'm fine, Mom, just tired." "It'll pass," he had answered, voice flat, eyes fixed on nothing. His father, Robert, handled things differently. He was quieter, but his worry was written all over his face. One night over dinner, he tried to reach out again. "Son, maybe you should play piano again," he suggested. "Your old one's still in the basement. You used to love playing." "I'm not interested in music anymore, Dad," David said, and left the table. The silence that followed was colder than the Manchester winter outside. At 3 a.m, David often sat awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of his old radio, his only companion in those sleepless hours. But on one particular night, as he aimlessly turned the dial, a familiar melody drifted through the static. A soft guitar intro, then a voice. Times have changed, and times are strange. David froze. That voice, deep, aching, raw, filled the room like something alive. Ozzy Osbourne. The song, "Mama, I'm Coming Home." For a moment, he thought about turning it off. But something in those words held him. "Here I come, but I ain't the same." The melody pierced the fog in his mind. Every lyric felt like it was written for him. The feeling of being lost, the longing for something he couldn't name. When the chorus came, "Mama, I'm coming home," David's eyes filled with tears. He hadn't cried in months. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Darkness, where true stories of music and redemption come alive. As the final notes faded, the silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. For the first time in 6 months, David felt something real. He didn't know it yet, but that song, a 3-minute ballad from 1991, had just cracked open the walls of his despair. That night, David didn't sleep. He stayed awake, replaying the song, writing down its lyrics, staring at the name, Ozzy Osbourne, and wondering how someone could put pain into melody so beautifully. He whispered to himself, Maybe I'm not alone." Morning crept into the room, gray and silent. For the first time in months, David didn't hide under his blanket when the sun rose. Instead, he sat up, grabbed his phone, and typed Ozzy Osbourne story into the search bar. He didn't expect what he found. Born John Michael Osbourne, Birmingham, 1948. Working-class family. Dropped out of school at 15. Worked in a slaughterhouse. David scrolled through every detail with fascination. This man, this legend of heavy metal, had once been a poor factory worker, struggling with identity, depression, and addiction. Ozzy's life was far from glamorous. It was messy, painful, human. The more David read, the more parallels he saw between them. Different worlds, same emotions. Ozzy had fought his demons through music. David had simply stopped fighting his. He watched interviews where Ozzy spoke candidly about his battles with alcohol, loneliness, and the search for peace. One quote stayed with him. "Music was the only thing that didn't judge me." David whispered it under his breath. The only thing that didn't judge me. He knew exactly what that meant. When Sarah saw her son sitting at the desk for the first time in months, she froze in the doorway. "David?" she said gently. He turned toward her, eyes a little brighter. "Mom, could you get me some Ozzy Osbourne albums?" She blinked, surprised. "Ozzy, metal music. You always liked Beethoven and Debussy." David smiled faintly. A real smile, the first in half a year. "Maybe it's time for a change, Mom. His music, it gets how I feel." Sarah didn't fully understand, but she didn't need to. Hope had finally returned to her son's face. She nodded quickly. "Of course, darling. I'll get them right away." As she left, tears welled in her eyes. For months she had prayed for a sign, any sign, that her son wanted to live again. While his mother was out, David watched the Mama, "I'm Coming Home" music video. Ozzy's voice, the emotion in his eyes, the combination of stage footage and home moments with Sharon. It all felt raw and honest. David wasn't seeing a rock star anymore. He was seeing a man who had suffered, fallen, and rebuilt himself through love and art. "This song," David murmured, "isn't just about going home. It's about finding your way back to yourself." When his mother returned from Manchester's biggest record shop, she was holding a small bag with 5 CDs, Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, The Ultimate Sin, No More Tears, and Osmosis. David's hands trembled as he took them. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. She smiled, touched his cheek and said, "Welcome home, love." Neither of them noticed the significance of those words just yet. That night, David sat cross-legged on his bed, headphones on, lights off. He started with Blizzard of Oz. The opening notes of I Don't Know echoed like thunder. He closed his eyes. The lyrics hit him. "People look to me and say, 'Is the end near? When is the final day?'" Every song felt like Ozzy was speaking directly to him, acknowledging confusion, embracing it, and still pushing forward. When Crazy Train came on, David laughed, a small, broken laugh, realizing the irony. "I'm going off the rails on a crazy train." That was exactly how his mind had felt these past 6 months. Chaotic, unsteady, directionless. But the song didn't glorify the madness. It channeled it. And for the first time, David understood that pain could be turned into art. The next morning, David woke up early, before his alarm, before the city. The room still looked messy, but the air had changed. He went downstairs, made himself tea, and opened the curtains. Sunlight spilled into the room, catching the dust in golden swirls. Sarah noticed. "You're up early," she said, smiling as she poured coffee. "Yeah," David replied. "Couldn't sleep. Been listening to Ozzy all night." She smiled wider. "I'd rather hear guitars than silence, sweetheart." Later that afternoon, David searched for the story behind Mama, "I'm Coming Home." He discovered that Ozzy wrote it in 1991, a love letter to Sharon, and a reflection on homecoming, healing, and belonging after years of chaos. David understood it differently. For him, home wasn't a place. It was the feeling of being alive again. He listened to Suicide Solution next, at first alarmed by the title. But as he read the lyrics, he realized it was a warning, not a glorification. Ozzy was confronting addiction and despair, not celebrating it. That honesty resonated deeply. "This isn't darkness," David said softly. "It's survival." Days passed. The music became his therapy. He played it while cleaning his room, while eating, even while writing in his old notebook. On one page he wrote, "Ozzy's songs aren't just sound. They're confession, courage, and comfort." For the first time in months, he wasn't afraid of his own thoughts. One evening, his father noticed something unusual, a faint humming sound from David's room. He quietly opened the door and saw his son mouthing lyrics, tapping his hand on the desk like a drum. Robert didn't say a word. He just stood there, smiling silently before closing the door again. Later that night, he whispered to his wife, "He's coming back. Sarah, our boy's coming back." David didn't know it yet. But this was the beginning of his own resurrection, one chord, one lyric, one breath at a time. And the song that found him that night Mama, I'm Coming Home, would soon become more than just music. It would become his story. The Manchester sky hadn't changed, still low, still gray, but inside the Thompson house something subtle had shifted. David no longer counted the hours by how long he could stare at the ceiling. He now counted songs. Each morning began with the crackle of an old CD player. He let Over the Mountain or Goodbye to Romance spill through the walls, while he sat at his desk reading articles about Ozzy's early days in Birmingham. He discovered stories that felt strangely familiar. A shy kid mocked for his accent, drifting from job to job, haunted by failure yet obsessed with sound. Ozzy's first microphone had been an old vacuum cleaner tube. David smiled at that. Ingenuity born from desperation. The more he read, the more he felt a kinship forming across time. Ozzy had once stood exactly where he was standing now, uncertain, frightened, and utterly lost. That thought stayed with him all week. One afternoon, Sarah peeked into his room and froze again. David was cleaning. Books stacked neatly, dishes washed, curtains drawn back. "You're redecorating?" she asked, almost afraid to break the spell. "Not redecorating," David said with a soft grin. "Just making space." "For what?" He looked at the empty corner near the window. "For something new. Maybe a guitar," Sarah's breath caught. For months she'd prayed for any sign of interest in life. A guitar, an instrument, was more than she dared hope for. "I'll go with you tomorrow," she said quickly. He shook his head. "Thanks, Mom. I think I want to do this on my own." That night he could hardly sleep. He kept replaying Diary of a Madman and imagining the strings, the chords, the vibration of wood against his chest. For the first time since leaving university, he was excited for tomorrow. At the music store, Manchester's Central Music Store smelled of varnish and nostalgia. Guitars hung on the walls like stories waiting to be told. Behind the counter stood Mike, gray-haired, denim vest, friendly eyes that had seen decades of dreamers come and go. "Looking for something particular, lad?" "Yeah," David said shyly. "A guitar, beginner, but good enough to grow with." Mike studied him for a moment. "First one?" "Yeah." "Then let's find the one that talks back to you." He handed David a simple electroacoustic model, the kind that hummed even before it was strummed. David held it awkwardly, then brushed a string. The sound shimmered like light on water. Mike smiled. "That's the look I was waiting for." David nodded, eyes damp. "Feels right. Music's funny that way," Mike said. "Heals the parts doctors can't," David told him in halting sentences about the night Mama, I'm Coming Home played on the radio, about the emptiness that song had filled. Mike listened silently, arms folded. When David finished, he said, "Then this isn't just your first guitar, son. It's your second chance." David left the store with the instrument in hand and hope in his eyes. The first weeks were painful, literally. His fingertips burned, chords buzzed, progress crawled. But pain felt different now. It wasn't despair. It was evidence of effort. He followed YouTube tutorials late into the night, pausing videos of Ozzy's guitarist Randy Rhoads, rewinding until the riffs made sense. Sometimes he'd close his eyes and imagine himself on a small stage playing softly while a crowd listened in silence. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing freedom. Sarah's song every evening. Sarah heard the hesitant plucking of strings from upstairs. At first they were uneven, clumsy. But soon they formed fragments of melodies. Then came humming. Then words. She stood outside the door one night, tears welling, as David quietly sang, "Times have changed and times are strange." It was raw and trembling, but it was alive. She pressed her hand against the doorframe and whispered, "Welcome home, my boy." The turning point 3 weeks later. David walked into the kitchen with a strange confidence. "Mom, I've signed up for beginner guitar lessons at the community music school." Sarah nearly dropped the kettle. "You what?" "I want to learn properly." "Maybe meet people," her voice cracked. "That's wonderful, love. Truly wonderful." The following Monday, he walked through the doors of the small red brick building that housed the music school. The hallway buzzed with chatter, piano scales echoing, drums thudding faintly from a basement room. He felt awkward, out of place, until someone tapped his shoulder. First day, David turned to see a tall boy with wild hair and a Metallica hoodie. "Yeah," David said. "You?" "Tom," the boy replied, grinning. "I've been here a year." "Don't worry. Everyone's nervous at first." That conversation marked the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives. Lessons David's instructor, Emma Rowe, was patient but strict. Relax your wrist, keep the rhythm steady. You can't force music. It's not about control, it's about surrender. That phrase stayed with him long after the lesson ended. He practiced until calluses formed and pain gave way to fluidity. Every note was a small victory, every chord a reminder that progress was possible. Tom's advice after class one day, Tom invited him for coffee. "So what got you into guitar?" "Ozzy Osbourne," David answered without hesitation. Tom laughed. "The Prince of Darkness? Not bad." "He saved me," David said quietly. The laughter faded. Tom nodded slowly. "Then play like it matters." From that day, they practiced together every weekend. Tom loved heavy riffs. David gravitated toward melody. Their contrasting styles blended perfectly. Metal and melancholy, strength and soul. By late summer, Manchester finally saw sunlight. David no longer avoided mirrors. The shadows under his eyes had lightened. The spark had returned. He was still recovering, still fragile, but now there was rhythm in his days. Practice, lessons, meals, walks. Even his father noticed. One Sunday, Robert knocked on his door holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Mind if I come in?" "Of course, Dad." He looked around at the posters on the wall, Ozzy, Sabbath, Randy Rhoads, and smiled. "You've changed the place." "Yeah," David said. "Feels like mine again." Robert hesitated, then said, "You know, I used to think metal was just noise. But seeing what it's done for you, maybe I was wrong." David laughed. "You can say that again." Robert took a sip and added, "Maybe we'll go to an Ozzy concert one day." David's face lit up. "Really? Really? He's the man who brought my son back." They clinked mugs like old friends. Performance. Prep a few weeks later, Emma approached David after class. "The school's holding a small recital next month." "You should play," David blinked. "Me? I'm not ready." "You're more ready than you think," she said. "Play the song that started it all." He knew exactly which one she meant. That night he practiced "Mama, I'm Coming Home" until his voice cracked. He wasn't trying to imitate Ozzy. He was trying to understand him. Every lyric was a conversation with his past self. The return. The day of the recital arrived. Modest hall, 50 chairs, string lights overhead. Sarah and Robert sat in the front row, holding hands. Backstage, David paced nervously. His palms were sweating. His heart pounded. Emma touched his shoulder. "Remember, you're not performing at them. You're sharing with them." He nodded, stepped on stage, and faced the crowd. "My name's David Thompson," he began. 6 months ago, I couldn't get out of bed. Then one night I heard this song on the radio. It gave me hope when I thought there was none. This is my way of saying thank you." He strummed the first chord. His voice shook at first, but as he reached the chorus, something inside him opened. "Mama, I'm coming home." The hall was silent except for his voice and the soft echo of strings. When the final note faded, the audience rose to their feet. Sarah wept openly. Robert clapped until his hands hurt. For David, it wasn't applause he heard. It was forgiveness. Rebirth. Life. That night, walking home under the same gray sky, he looked up and whispered, "Thank you, Ozzy. Thank you for showing me the way back." He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Soon, music wouldn't just heal him. It would help him heal others.